Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are.
That's the commitment we made.
Did you know that it's been more than 70 years since the Chinese Civil War in 1949? And literally every single day since then, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, has been talking about a peace reunification by means of an armed military invasion of Taiwan? After all this time, it begs the question, is the actual capture of the island itself really important for the Chinese government, or is it just talking about it that's important? What's this? Top officials are caught up in public corruption scandals. Quick, talk about an invasion. What's this? The people are fighting out communism is BS. Talk about an invasion. What's this? Our idiot zero COVID policy is leading to an economic collapse. Invasion. It seems like the threat of an invasion of Taiwan is one of the best ways to divert attention from bad policies of the CCP and immediately drum up national support domestically without risking any real consequences that could reverse public opinion. This is extremely convenient because Taiwan is often painted as a lapdog of the USA. As soon as they do this, China can continue to play the victim card and blame the US or the West for somehow encroaching on the one China policy. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not just the evil white men from the West that's bullying little old China. It's also those evil yellow men from the East, Japan, that's bullying little old China too. China also loves playing the victim card to drum up national support as the CCP literally funds movies and promotes anti-Japanese propaganda to remind its citizen about the Japanese Nanjing occupation in World War II. In fact, the get-out-of-jail-free card of talking about an invasion and playing the victim is so effective, it's a tool that can basically be used forever. I mean, it's literally been more than 70 years since 1949, and the CCP still are talking about an invasion of Taiwan. Could it be because they themselves know that they don't have the actual capability to take Taiwan? There's no doubt the People's Liberation Army is very impressive on paper. Whilst the country of 1.6 billion people clearly has no problem with quantity, the quality of its soldiers clearly leaves a lot to be desired. Whilst patriotism manifests itself in some parts of the society, the one-child policy has absolutely guaranteed that they systematically produce literally the worst type of poor and pathetic weak soldier the world has ever seen. Why? Well, think about it. For 36 years, their one-child policy has ensured that one man and one woman can only produce one child. Well, the father of that one child also has a grandma and grandpa to take care of. The mother of that one child also has a grandma and grandpa to take care of. So in other words, one child potentially needs to take care of 6 people, 2 generations before him. In the past, with more children, this burden wouldn't be as onerous. But thanks to the one-child policy, this one child has no other choice. This has created army soldiers who are seen as little emperors, who are spoiled to death by 6 adults from birth and are terrible at listening to authority and taking commands. If you haven't realized already, these kinds of kids do not make up a good fighting force as they lack resilience and toughness of mind. China, boasting more than 2 million soldiers, does have by far the world's largest military. But remember, we're not talking about 2 million battle-hardened Spartans making their last stand at the Battle of Thermopylae. We're talking about 2 million of the lowest quality and most combat inexperienced soldiers in existence who literally haven't won a real war in at least 3 decades. Just like the low-quality products coming out of China, even their military is made in China. Yes, the average Taiwanese soldier is probably complete garbage as well, but at least he won't be sailing over the sea using made-in-China boats and equipment. We've all seen how corruption has devastated the effectiveness of the world's number 2 military, Russia. Well, just like everything else online, if you think you've seen something amazing, there's always some Asian out there that will take it to the next level. If you thought the Russian military got screwed by corruption, I guarantee that you haven't seen what Chinese corruption in the military looks like yet. The last recorded large-scale military conflict was against Vietnam. Even after the Vietnamese literally just fought off a brutal American invasion that left millions of Vietnamese dead and most of its infrastructure burned to the ground, a completely fresh China still couldn't do a ground invasion and defeat its severely gassed-out tiny neighbor. If they can't even invade the rubble on their borders by land properly, then how would they ever navigate the logistical minefield that a sea invasion of Taiwan would represent? And let's not forget, China
is asshole
and has done the impossible and has managed to literally piss off every single one of its neighbors and has no friends. And if you think Russia and North Korea are actually friends with China, then you must also believe that North Korea is a real democracy, because the full name says Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Whilst China can dominate many of its Asian neighbors, India is one that hates them and cannot be ignored at any moment. In 2021, there were actual physical border clashes between Indian and Chinese soldiers, resulting in deaths on both sides. Japan, the world's third largest economy with one of the world's most powerful active self-defense militaries, well, they also hate China. Beijing also needs to be mindful of keeping an eye on the flow of extremists from the Middle East that they've barely managed to prevent destabilizing parts of the country over the last 20 years. Then there's the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, QSD. This is a strategic security dialogue between Australia, India, Japan, and the United States designed to specifically contain the Chinese threat. In other words, there is simply far too much for China to juggle in the region for it to be able to focus all its resources on the invasion of Taiwan currently. And if that wasn't enough of a problem, Taiwan's geography makes invading it 10 times harder than Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. This is because China and Taiwan are separated by the Taiwan Strait. A basic military general will be able to tell you in order for a sea invasion to be successful, the invader needs to have 1. Air superiority, 2. The element of surprise, 3. Number superiority. If you miss any of these 3 elements, then it's almost guaranteed that the invader will fail. The People's Liberation Army's Air Force has around 400,000 active personnel and over 330 aircraft. Taiwan, on the other hand, has a much smaller air force with 70,000 active personnel and over 400 combat aircraft. But remember, since China literally has made enemies with every single one of its neighbors, it cannot devote its entire Air Force fleet to deal with Taiwan, because they still need to do basic border patrol and security around its massive borders. With land borders of 22,117 kilometers, or 13,743 miles, China has the longest aggregate land borders of any country. But even if they do just send 50% of their planes to Taiwan, that's still more than the Taiwanese have. So Taiwan is screwed here, right? Well, not so fast. Taiwan has other secrets up its sleeve. It can't be said for sure just how much the island has available in terms of anti-air defenses, but it is also widely suspected that Taiwan has an extensive arsenal of hidden anti-air equipment hidden all across the island. So it's not like it's going to be a walk in the park for the Chinese Air Force either. China will not have the element of surprise if they choose to attack. There is literally no way China can sneak up on Taiwan and ninja invade. This is because the strait between China and Taiwan is notoriously difficult to navigate. Even with modern advancement in shipping technology, we still can't beat Mother Nature. The Taiwan Strait itself is literally too rough to mount a massive invasion for 10 months of a year, and there are only around 2 months in a calendar year where a mass crossing of the strait is even slightly favorable. Hint: these 2 months are at separate times of the year. So in other words, Beijing has 2 separate windows of opportunities, each with a maximum of 30 days to complete the invasion before Neptune himself will come from the ocean and stop the invasion with strong seas. And it's not like these 2 months are a secret either. But let's pretend the Taiwanese generals are all brain-dead morons who have no idea what months are the best across the sea. An even bigger giveaway would be the huge amount of time needed for preparation. This then brings me to the number superiority you would need to have. Normally, an invader needs a 3-to-1 advantage and outnumber the defender to have a hope of winning. Taiwan has around 170,000 active military personnel, with 1.5 million in reserve. Let's forget the men in reserve for now and just focus on how many troops China would need to bring to overwhelm the active military. 170,000 times 3 equals 510,000. So China needs to bring 510,000 men by boat, suffering 0 casualties. That's more than 500,000 people. This means any invasion of Taiwan is guaranteed to be preceded by at least 1 or 2 months of a massive buildup that literally can't be missed. But let's pretend that China somehow manages to sneak hundreds of thousands of men across the sea unnoticed. They are still facing a huge problem. The east side of the island is basically 100% made up of unscalable cliffs, meaning the only realistic landing zone would be the west side of the island. But even then, the natural terrain advantage for the defender makes it so that there are only like 14 realistic landing zones for the Chinese to do a sea invasion from. So in other words, if the Chinese do invade, they'll be walking into 14 carefully set up death traps and kill zones defended to the teeth using advanced, modernized American military technology purchased by the Taiwanese. Remember, China has been threatening to attack Taiwan for 70 years. This means Taiwan has also had 70 years to prepare for an invasion. But so what? China literally has the largest army on the planet. They can just easily swarm the Taiwanese with overwhelming superiority in numbers, right? Well, no. Numbers alone would not be enough to overwhelm Taiwan. Remember, there are only 14 suitable landing spots. On such a small battlefield, having literally hundreds of thousands of people around you on made-in-China boats actually reduces your numbers advantage. Do you remember that movie, 300? Where 300 Spartans, along with around another 1,000 slaves, were nearly able to fend off an invading army that had a numbers advantage of 10-to-1. if they weren't betrayed by a traitor. The reason the Spartans were able to fight so effectively was because they were able to bottleneck the attackers with a mountain pass on one side and a cliff overlooking the ocean into another, in effect turning the number superiority to a massive disadvantage for the enemy. They were able to do that with just a spear and shield. Now imagine the same scenario, but this time they were armed with modern-day machine guns, missiles, artillery, and cannons, and you were doing it by boat. Did I also mention, close to almost every potential landing zone, there are overwatching mountains? So the Taiwanese military would have the high ground immediately to position their artillery forces to rain fire down on invaders with predictable maneuvers. And in order to pull this off, the Chinese would need to beat the previous biggest sea invasion in recorded human history by a scale of 3. Did you know in 1945 the U.S. actually considered attacking Taiwan when it was occupied by Japan in Operation Causeway, but in the end decided the risk wasn't worth it? This was despite the Japanese having only between 30,000 to 50,000 troops not using modern U.S.-made military equipment. Yes, the Americans, who just succeeded 6 months before in the largest sea invasion in history in Normandy in 1944. And even at that time, the Americans thought it was too insanely hard and they literally pulled it off just before. So really, what chance do the Chinese have when this invasion needs to be 3 times bigger than Normandy? And it'll be against modern weapons when they have literally never done a sea invasion. Ever. Also, just in case the poop hits the fan and an actual war does occur, Taiwan has backup. Lots of it. This long-standing U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity is no longer so unambiguous. U.S. President Joe Biden has confirmed this.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are.
That's the commitment we made.
The White House has contradicted him on a few occasions, but seriously, who are we kidding here? If the President of the United States has confirmed they're going to back you up on public TV, but later one of his random employees says he didn't mean that, who are you going to believe? The President of the United States or the random guy whose name you don't even remember? And it's not just America who will support Taiwan. Japan has already confirmed that an attack on Taiwan from China is an attack on Japan itself. And as I mentioned earlier, the Quad, made up of Australia, India, Japan, and the United States, was also designed specifically to deal with China. And this brings me to logistics and supplies. To amateurs, wars are won with guns, but to the experienced, wars are won with logistics. If Beijing were to attack Taiwan, remember, it would need to conquer it really fast, within basically 30 days maximum, due to the weather conditions around the Taiwan Strait. If they didn't, then constantly resupplying hundreds of thousands of troops and equipment across a sea when you're bottlenecked at 14 landing zones makes it logistically impossible. Just think about the traffic jam you'd get where you have thousands of dead soldiers, hundreds of boats, some bombed out, some stranded, some deserted with bullets, while wading through landmines, gunfire flying by, incoming missiles, and explosions going off all around you. And on top of that, Australia and India have conducted possible scenarios whereby they would block the Strait of Malacca, thus effectively killing 80% of China's oil imports. Remember, you can't fight a war with no oil. And unlike Russia, Beijing is not a net exporter of natural resources. In fact, China is the world's largest importer of oil, all coming through the exact location where Australia and India have already practiced blocking. In short, Beijing is not Russia, and its economy is reliant on foreign trade more and does not have enough natural resources to sustain itself during peacetime, let alone have enough resources to sustain a drawn-out war. And even if they didn't have logistical problems, their enemies like India might just sense weakness in their military and take advantage of it. There are just so many factors stacked against China that any invasion of Taiwan would have to go absolutely perfect. Even the best military in the world, the USA, decided that taking down the Taiwanese island fortress was too hard. Their geography is a defender's dream, minimizing available invasion points and offering many vantage spots from which to repel invaders. There are no countries, hostile or not, for thousands of miles to Taiwan's east. The same can't be said for China, of course. They are bordered by literally billions of people, many of whom they struggle to maintain a good relationship with. They'd have to navigate that diplomatic balance act as well as the treacherous Taiwan Strait if an invasion were to ever be feasible. In the meantime, however, they can continue to squeeze out every little bit of national excitement by waving the possibility in front of the population. That is why China has been talking about invading since 1949, but has actually not done it. To them, Taiwan is probably more useful as a propaganda asset than anything else.